Ha! You guys thought the Dragon Les Paul was the Halloween special for 2022? Did you not see the asterisk? 'Twas but a mere warm-up, because spooky guitar season is not over yet. At the Trogly's Guitar Show, the Halloween special is on Halloween, even if it does become obsolete the very next day in November. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. The ghoulish treat I have to share with you guys comes from the Netherlands at the Fellowship of Acoustics. I've bought an item or two from these guys before, but a couple of months back, they listed the strangest Flying V that I'd ever seen. I got so excited about it. We did the whole detective episode. They pulled the listing to figure out what it was, and they decided that they don't know what it is, so they offered it to me to dig into it a little bit further. So for better or worse, I own this thing now, and we're going to see it in the flesh, because photos only tell you so much of the tale. Let's see what is going on with... Oh my goodness. It breaks my heart that this is not factory original, because this is such a stunning piece. It really reminds me of like some high-end Deans. But this is that crazy Flying V. So let's go ahead and get my first impressions of this thing. There was a lot of talk that this finish looked like a poly finish in the photos. And now that I have it in person, I think I'm going to agree with that sentiment. It definitely does not feel like a true nitro. However, it doesn't feel bad at the same time. But in case you missed that last episode, basically this appears to have been a 1981 Gibson Flying V that somebody took and converted it to kind of look like the V specs as far as having like a flame maple top on here and all the other gorgeous purfling around the edges. But there was a lot of talk in the comment section that people think this might be an Ed Roman creation, mainly because the work looks so professional, and I'm going to agree. Looking at this thing in person, I think this would fool most people just looking at it at first glance. I mean, sure, the finish is a little bit silkier than normal, and there's a few telltale signs that we'll go over again that this didn't leave the factory like this. But if you don't know, Ed Roman is like the king of guitar fakes. He was the guy people went to when they wanted invisible repairs, but like part of the terms and contracts was you don't ever get to know what he did. So there's like that one story where somebody wanted a Carina Flying V repaired and he just replaced the entire body. So for all intents and purposes, this is just a remade 1981 Gibson Flying V that we're going to tear apart today. But this is just quite the sight. It's a beautiful piece. It needed to be documented. I don't care if it didn't leave the factory like this. It's beautiful. So whether this had anything to do with Ed Roman or not, I don't think we'll ever be able to know unless somebody sees one of these videos and goes, oh yeah, I did that, and has photographic evidence to back it up. But let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench, take a look at its parts and specs, and enjoy this thing for what it is. All right, let's go ahead and dig in here. I'm happy with what I see so far. First off, we have Gibson USA pickups in here. We learned that last time, and that is not correct. The earliest date that Gibson used this base plate was 1991. Before then, they just used that whole engraved patent number. But what model are we playing with? We've got an 8.48 in the bridge and an 8.28 in the neck. Okay, that's interesting. It very well might just be a 490 neck and 490 bridge. So that was a bit of a surprise. I was fully expecting those to be 490R, 498T, or maybe even something hotter. But similar readings to what T-tops would be, just a little bit more. But now it's the pickup cavities that we really need to take a good long hard look at. Like, the shop's photos were pretty good, but seeing it in person helps paint more to the tale. Okay, so we have what we want to see, large routes into the mahogany body with these legs. That is something that Gibson does. However, then we have a few other small pinholes. Now that could have been part of the restoration project. But what I couldn't see at first glance here is you see this mahogany has a very different wood grain structure to whatever this is. It just looks like there's finish over top of it. But there's actually a significant dip down right here. So there's actually like some splintered mahogany right here that just covers something over. But then the bridge pickup cavity shows us a little bit more. We have bare wood exposed here, which doesn't look very Gibson-like. Then we have three little routes right here. And then when I first saw this, I thought this was like wax potting, like that was a buildup and you could go down further. No, that's just buffing compound. So this is not actually deeper than it looks. It is still the correct depth that Gibson would use. But what we couldn't see before is this. We actually have two dowels in here that presumably start to run through the body, but somebody decided that they didn't want to do the wires that way, so they plugged them up. But yet you do still have two pins right here, so I'm not quite sure what that was about. But if you look right here, you can very clearly see that there is a different piece of mahogany in that area. That's actually a really good sign for this guitar that this is still the original body. Because normal Flying Vs, when you take their pick guards off, they look like this. They have two big blocky routes, then they have a singular channel going down here, and then it eventually leads into your control cavity. Since we have a plug of wood covering over that original one, it definitely makes sense that this is what that started life as, an original Flying V. I mean, it's got the correct body neck construction. The necks on 70s and 80s Flying Vs stick up a little bit farther. That's part of their magic. So it seems very logical that somebody just slapped a new maple top on this thing to cover over those routes, as well as filled in the wood underneath it. That way it doesn't like crack or anything. And that's how we got to what we have here today. Now, judging by the pickups and all the electronics, I would assume this was done sometime in the early 2000s by somebody that really knows their 70s and 80s Gibson history, because this totally looks like something Gibson would have done if they were trying to create a beautiful art show display piece. But here you can actually see the full maple top that was put on here. Now, is there still a possibility that that's a plain maple top and then they put a real wood fancy quilted veneer on top? I mean, I can't say one way or the other. I can't see any figuring in that area, but sometimes that's hard to tell from the side. But I can say this does have some decent movement to it in the correct lighting situations. I mean, we just talked in the Dragon episode where quilt tops look fantastic at almost any angle, but they don't have as much travel as a flame top does. Meaning, yeah, the dark areas will turn light and dark, but it's not gonna like move as much as a flame top. As far as the bridge, it is a genuine Gibson ABR1. Definitely looks like just a historic style one though, not true vintage. And the tailpiece also looks similar to a 2000s era one. And you'll notice that the layout here is the exact same for a regular style Flying V, so they probably just left it alone, just put the top on and let that be. But those look like late 90s, early 2000s historic reissue knobs. I could be wrong on that though. Then we've got our three-way toggle switch here, 2 volumes, master tone, output jack. But I've never had a high-end guitar with the abalone purfling before, so I was always curious, how exactly do they do that? How do they get such a long stripe of it? So these are actually about 3-inch segments that they just pieced together to make it look good. Like at first glance, it almost looks like it's just one continuous piece. But if you look really closely, you can see a seam line between the different pieces. But I would say they did a really good job matching this up. I mean, that's the difference between this V and this V. Both are similar guitars that got converted in vaguely similar ways. But in my opinion, one turned out like a masterful creation, the other one kind of just looks like a hack job. But at the end of the day, they were both going for different things, and both are fun ways to get a crazy 70s style Flying V. So far, the craftsmanship on this is just off the charts. I mean, usually I don't like, modified guitars for my collection, but this one, I don't know, it's got such a charm to it. I really, really, really love 70s and 80s Flying Vs, and feeling this, just strumming it a little bit before I took it apart, I could tell it was real because they have a very certain resonance to them. They have a very certain feel. We'll see that with the neck specs here in a second. But my biggest question when buying this was, is it the original Gibson body? I think it is. It was just very heavily modified because my previous notions were it's probably a rebody, but I'm no longer quite thinking that. Now, does it really matter? No. I mean, as long as it's a Gibson neck, you can call it a Gibson because it's got the serial number and everything. But that was a nice bonus that everything else here checked out. So moving on to the neck, it is a mahogany neck and you've got a rosewood fretboard. And I was telling you guys in that last episode, you can't convert dot inlays to blocks because the 12th fret inlay is so far spaced apart. You'll actually see that you have the little small dots on either side of the inlay. And the only way around that is to make the 12th fret inlay obnoxiously large. So I was initially thinking this was a new fretboard. It's not. I don't know how he did it, but the abalone masks the fact that this is so much larger and longer than a regular 12th fret inlay should be. Like, it should be shrunk down just a little bit, but they did that, once again, to cover the dots. So this is what, roughly 1.44 inches, when it should be closer to 1.37-ish. But I give props to the builder. They did that in such a way with this material that it's not as jarring as it usually is. I think it's just because of this ridiculous abalone shell. I was initially giving compliments saying, yeah, that looks exactly like what Gibson was using in the 70s and 80s, but nah, Now that I've had this in person, this is a little bit more extreme than what they were doing, but it still looks fantastic. I mean, this one's got a whole bunch of stuff going on. This one's got like a psychedelic owl going on. Like that's his wing, that's his two eyes, that's his beak, and then he's got like a multiplying effect going on. I mean, these are pretty sweet inlays. But it does look like this was refretted. These are definitely a little bit bigger than what would have came stock. But hey, that's not a bad thing. And in my opinion, the side marker inlays are looking a little bit larger than they normally do. But they might have like re-radiused the fretboard and that like skewed the top of them a little bit. It's either that or they replaced what material they were made out of. To like mother of pearl or something. But it's still 24 3/4 inch scale length. Has the super skinny 1.56 inch nut width, which yes, it is correct for these models. That's part of their charm. And only 1.93 at the 12th fret. They're very thin feeling necks. It's great for playing thumb over style. But then 0.84 inches at the first fret neck depth, which is skinny, but then it chunks up to 0.99. Here's what that neck profile looks like at the 1st and 12th fret. Just very slim and rounded C shape. I finally got an answer on the headstock here. You can indeed see that that was just another veneer that they placed over top of it. I guess that was another question I had on this originally. Did they actually route the body down a little bit and then put the maple top on, or is this thicker than normal? Unfortunately, I don't have a 70s Flying V with me, but in the future, if you happen to take measurements, I've got this as 1.36 inches thick. Now remember, some of it's the poly finish is a little bit thicker than nitro, but if anybody has a 70s V that they can compare that with, please leave me a comment. And as far as the headstock, 0.64. This nut was definitely redone. Gibson doesn't use them like that. But it almost looks like they made it skinnier than normal. Our truss rod is looking fantastic on this one. Obviously, we've got some finish touch-ups, and there's like a little bit of a dent or something right there. Maybe they had to fill in a screw hole, but you gotta remember that this is a new topper, so it could just be that the finish had an imperfection right there, which is what I would more so lean towards. But this truss rod cover is what sold me into wanting to buy this piece, because beautiful two-piece quilted maple logo looks 100% authentic. Whoever did that, fantastic job. And you can actually see, yes indeed, that is full thickness. So I guess if they did that correctly for this, it's most likely a full-on quilted maple top. That's not a plain with a veneer over it. The only downside is this is obnoxiously thick, and like the strings are just barely making clearance. But interesting choice to use a one-piece maple veneer over top of this, instead of like trying to do the whole center seam. But this is definitely the correct, really wide style Flying V headstock as they had in this era. But the tuner's obviously not correct. And now we can move over to the backside. You've got a strap button right here. Seems to be slightly off center, but probably left the factory that way. Otherwise we would have saw a filled in plug. Then your other one is down here. And normally this is a top routed instrument. Obviously it's been converted to a back route, so this will not look familiar to any Gibson model. But again, it does not have the correct Gibson style pots that they were using at this time. It doesn't have the correct three-way switch or the output jack. Now, I am tempted to get like real 1981 pots, put them in here, get the correct color wiring, put some Tim Shaw PAFs in this and add it to my collection. But even though I've documented this guitar not once, but twice, that tells the true story, I'd be scared, maybe YouTube gets taken down in the future and then this gets passed off as real one day. But if I ever do find a cheap set of gold Tim Shaw PAFs, I'll at least put those in there because that's what this guitar originally would have had. But looking back here, I can kind of see the wood figuring, so I think that's also another one that says, yes, this is indeed a full-on quilted maple top. And you can see that whole ribbon mahogany effect that you would find in these Flying Vs. However, this thick finish has made it harder to see and appreciate, but that's definitely a mahogany body here. But for adding binding on a guitar that doesn't already have binding, they did a stellar job. I mean, this is all clean looking. Now we can move up the backside of the neck where we are met with the giant volute. That's always what made me go, yeah, that's definitely a Gibson original neck. and this was a Kalamazoo made one. Last time I was saying it's kind of hard to read the serial number, which it is, but it definitely dates to 1981, and I'm pretty confident that's a 0 now. And yes, indeed, that was the Made in USA stamp. But this particular one would have originally had the Schaller tuners on it, because that's where they mount. So that's been plugged and refinished over when they did the rest of the guitar to kind of help hide that. Now, if you know what you're looking for, it stands out like a sore thumb. But if you don't know what you're looking at, you might not have seen that. That's looking like a 83031020 for our serial number. And there's another dent in the finish right here, likely caused by a contamination. But we can definitely see that this headstock still has wings, so that helps us know it's a Gibson product. The tuners are also what kind of make me think this is probably done in the 2000s just because of the style of tuner that's on here. The Gibson branded Deluxe. The 80s version of the same tuner just has a different look to it. And if that wasn't enough, the back plate that's on this one is definitely not made out of the same material that Gibson uses. It's a little bit thicker. All said and done, this one weighs 7 pounds, 4.5 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds, because we already know it's beautiful. Now that we know all about this made-over Flying V, what are my final thoughts on this thing? Absolutely no regrets in purchasing it. Sure, it might not have left the factory like this, but at the end of the day, it's still a 1981 Gibson Flying V with a new finish and some additional appointments put onto it to make it really special. I mean, as I've said like almost the entire episode here, this looks like something Gibson could have made had they had tried to make like a the Les Paul version of a Flying V, because they had the V model at one point that kind of looked like this, but not exactly. So you're kind of starting to get like some Dean and Minerick vibes on this. So in that aspect, this is actually pretty cool, because you have to remember, these 70s and 80s Flying Vs are ridiculously expensive. Ones that don't have cracks and repairs on them, they range anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, depending on things like the condition and originality. So I do not see any evidence of a headstock crack on this one. So to be able to make this guitar, you would have to buy one of those at first and then pay a luthier probably a good $2,000 plus to do all these cool customizations to it. So I thought this was a pretty fair deal, all things considered. I mean, it's quite the looker, right? Alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. Hey, if you like this Flying V, why don't you check out the Mineric Inferno next? It has very similar appointments as far as the abalone and crazy flames. However, it's a slightly less traditional shape, to say the least.